let's come back home where we talk about Nigeria and some of the economic policies. There's a report suggesting that the policies being embarked on by President Bola Tinubu, especially the economic policies, are paying off, with the returns and the statistics being released in February. How do we establish this, and what will be the impact of this? Is suggesting that the foreign portfolio investment exceeded $1 billion in February. To provide proper perspective, we're being joined by Orji Chigozie Udemezue, who is the managing consultant, CEO of Flame Academy and Consulting Limited. Glad you have you join us on Early Extent this morning.
Yeah, good morning, my very good friend. It's also my pleasure to join you guys again this morning. How are you guys doing over there?
Yes, we're good. Glad you have joined us this morning. So let's start the conversation by having your take on this report suggesting that the economic reforms backed on by President Tinubu has been paying off. What's your opinion in this regard?
Well, the central bank has all the reports with other agencies under the Federal Ministry of Finance. They own the data, and whatever they tell us about the data, we will have to believe them. But for me, it is rather too early to call on these issues. Yet it's expected that when some policies or reforms are carried out, there should be some consequent impact on the economy. What I don't want the APC government to start doing now is to begin to hype things up too early. Yes, usually, like I've always preached over the years, when you bring the gap between the official foreign exchange rate and the parallel market rate, it may hurt the economy temporarily in terms of the kind of inflationary trend we're seeing right now. But when you close that gap, a multiple positive, outcome will happen. For example, the propensity, to round trip, that is, those who have access to this dollar through their connections in government or central bank and so on, buying the dollar at a lower rate from government and coming back to a round trip to sell it off again to people who actually need the money for transactions in the parallel market. That the incentive to do that, the propensity to do that will drop. All right? Once the gap is closed, and that will mean that those who have opportunity to send money to Nigeria, for example, diasporans who are living in America, UK, China, all kinds of places, will no longer be scared to send dollars to Nigeria, because usually under that huge gap, when they send their money, government, as we've been doing in the past, will collect their money at the official rate. Let's say official rate is 800 and the parallel market rate is 1,000. Somebody sending money from the US will send the money to the family and will be paid at 800. But when they go to buy things in the market, they are buying at 1,000. So it's a major disincentive for other foreign exchange inflow. So now the government has tried to close that gap. We expect, naturally, that inflows from other sources like diaspora inflow and other people who want to move their money into Nigeria will increase, because there's no more injustice in the exchange rate that they send their money with. That's one. Then two again, a few days ago, or about 2 weeks ago, the central bank's monetary policy committee also met, and in their continued push to fight inflation, even though I have my personal opinion against the hike in interest rates. I mentioned that with you on the day the MPC came out with their announcements. I'd expected a slight raise in the MPR, that's monetary policy rate. That's the anchor interest rate in Nigeria. I'd expected that rate to move up a little, but what we saw was a 400 basis point jack in that rate. All right? Even though we agree that such rate increases are to help, curtail inflation, but when rates are raised up, investors and people who have cash will tend to want to invest more of their funds than spend it. Because more spending, that is when more money is pursuing few goods, is what we naturally term inflation. So it's assumed that by jacking rates up, people will tend to invest more than consume. But that's, again, theoretical in economics. When you talk about demand pull inflation, but Nigeria's inflation is clearly not demand pull. Let me leave that for now. So by increasing rates, you expect that investment instruments will, give higher yield. That is, for example, people that want to buy commercial papers, bankers' acceptances, even fixed deposit in banks, investing in central banks' treasury bills. The rates will naturally go up. And that will mean that those who want to have a higher yield, higher rate of return on their investment will look in Nigeria's direction. Particularly people you call foreign portfolio investors. What does this mean for the ordinary Nigerian who may be listening to us? Foreign portfolio investors are investors who carry their money almost like in a portfolio, in a suitcase, looking for where they can get a higher, interest rate instrument to invest on a short-term basis, by the way. And that's why we don't have to hype this outcome until it becomes regular, consistent, and lasting for a while. So foreign portfolio investors want to come into your country and invest in your market instruments. For example, I've mentioned commercial papers, treasury bills, the open market operation, and so on. What does this mean? If they are coming in with their dollar to take advantage of this increase in interest rates, what it means is that Nigeria will have more inflow of foreign exchange, helping to douse the tension on the naira against the dollar. So it's a positive thing. But remember, we call them foreign portfolio investors. That means their money is not meant to stay in the economy on a long-term basis. Those who invest on a long-term basis are those we know as foreign direct investors. They come in to bring in equipment, employ labor, invest on a long-term basis in companies, other new companies or existing companies. But these portfolio investors, they are good to give you FX liquidity. But note again that because they are looking for short-term gains, they may soon be requiring to raise dollar back to transfer their money back to their home country. That may also put pressure on your local currency at the time they want to exit. It's only when the conditions are stable over time and then the FX rate gap is not changing again that you may see the foreign portfolio investors invest and reinvest, as in keep rolling over their investment, whereby the gain on your FX might be sustained. I don't know if this is clear enough. Thank you.
It is very clear. Now, what can be done to sustain foreign portfolio investors? You've mentioned that, yes, the interest rate is an incentive for them to come in. So the Nigerian economy would not want a situation where money is seen coming in and then things go well for a short while, only for it to revert after some time. What can sustain these investors? What conditions will sustain them?
Okay, one major factor that either makes the foreign portfolio investor stay in your economy or run away is the gap in exchange rate. Therefore, our dear central bank governor must insist and must consistently ensure that the foreign exchange rate, naira to dollar or dollar to naira rate in the official window must remain very close or in fact exactly the same as that rate in the streets. How do I mean? If a foreign investor is coming into your country with, say, $1 million, and is coming in today at the rate of, let's say, 1,600 naira, as it were, like on Friday. Okay, so he's coming in to get, $1 for 1,600 naira. So if he comes in with $1 million, he's going to get 1.6 billion naira. I hope that math is correct. So now, if the rate does not change, he hopes to put that 1.6 billion naira in our local investment instrument like Treasury bill, for example. Let's assume that Treasury bill offers a return of 20% to him. So 1.6 billion invested for 1 year will give him 20% interest. Let's say that is 320 million naira. Meaning that at the end of 1 year, that foreign portfolio investor would have increased their money from 1.6 billion naira to 1.92 billion naira. Correct? Fantastic return compared to what he will earn in America or UK or other developed economies where interest rates are below 5%, where he can't even talk about earning up to that. Now, if he has earned 1.9 billion naira, it is now time to return the money to his home country. Is the rate still 1,600 per dollar at that time? If it is, then his returns are real and he can move that money back, raising his shoulder that he has invested, he has beaten, the global rate, by investing in Nigeria, making so much money. But if, unfortunately, the rate at that time is no more 1,600, maybe the rate has depreciated, Naira has gone down, to, let's say, 2,000 Naira to $1 in 1 year's time. It means that that investor has, hurt himself by coming to Nigeria because 1.6 billion grew his money to 1.92 billion in 1 year. But to send the money back to his country, he now needs 2 billion to convert back to $1 million when he's going back. So the 1.92 he has earned has unfortunately also meant a loss to him. I don't know if you understand this. So exchange rate changes can hurt the foreign portfolio investor, making their gain, nullified by exchange rate differences. So one major factor to sustain this, as you asked me, is that the central bank must ensure that the rate remains closed. If I thought there's any devaluation, it shouldn't be very much. Or, like the central bank had done before, through what we call the FX futures window, through the FMDQ. I don't know if you understand, the way that market platform works. The FMDQ, Financial Market Data Quotation Platform, where the foreign investors can be assured of some certainty in the interest, in the FX rate they will exit in next 1 year by being given some futures contracts, whereby the central bank will say, you're a foreign investor bringing $1 million today. We give you a future agreement that $1 million you're bringing today, when you need it back in the next 1 year, we will give it back to you at 1.6 or at 1,600 to $1, irrespective of the rate at that time you want to exit. That is future contract where we agree on the rate today for the next 1 year to assure you that you move your money back to your country at the same rate. That can assure them to bring. Again, we don't hope and we don't want to pray that interest rate remains very high. Otherwise, that's another factor that will keep the foreign investor. But this one is dependent on the level of inflation that the government is fighting. No one hopes to continue to have a very high interest rate because as we speak, and as I mentioned to you in my last interview with you, a very huge jump in interest rate like we've seen during the last MPC means that local manufacturers and producers are going to be hurt in multiple ways. One, most producers in Nigeria import their input materials, chemicals, raw materials, and so on. So they are having very high cost of input materials as they manufacture in Nigeria. Two, they suffer a very high cost of energy, in producing in Nigeria. And then three, they now have to borrow at stupendously high interest rates. Like I can tell you for free, the interest rates in most banks in Nigeria are now averaging over 30%. So it's a triple whammy. You're a local producer in Nigeria, you have to import raw materials at a very crazy FX rate as it is right now. Now, you have to pay very high cost of energy because NEPA or whatever we call them will not give you power. You have to fund and fuel your plant. You have to operate your plant by your own, and then you have to borrow at a very high rate compared to your competitors in China or US who have to borrow at 3-4%. So at the end of the day, the local manufacturer will produce goods at a very high price. Now, because we have tendency to prefer foreign goods, then it is always better that foreign goods are much more costlier than local ones, so the local producer can sell and make money and remain in business. But unfortunately now, foreign goods even come in even cheaper or almost the same price as local goods, making local manufacturers driving out the global market, of course, in a world that is now globalized. So this is not good for local production. This is not good for unemployment rate because every time we import what we consume in this country, we are providing employment for foreigners while promoting unemployment in our local economy. That's a big issue the central bank must look at. And I've said here consistently, if we can be patient with our management of our FX, over time, it will help us manage our inflation other than hurting ourselves further by hiking, benchmark interest rates, the cash reserve requirement rates, and the liquidity ratio. Even though liquidity ratio has remained 30%, all right, but CRR jumping, by some hundreds of basis points, and MPR jumping too is a very terrible thing for this economy. CRR for 5% is one of the craziest in the world, and I think central bank should meet again in the next MPC and do a review of that CRR. It's okay to manage MPR going up, but CRR is direct hurting of the banks and bank borrowers.
Now let's look at overseas remittances. According to a figure provided by the CBN for the month of February, it has increased to $1.3 billion. Now, what do you make of this development? Because you said earlier that it's too early for Tinubu's administration to start celebrating. But what do you make of the statistics? And then how can the federal government sustain this overseas remittances? Sustain this hike in overseas remittances?
Okay, like I said earlier, as long as that report is coming from central bank, we have to believe it. And it's a good thing for the economy. We're not doubting them. It's a good sign that the reasons why people don't want to bring in their money into Nigeria, those reasons are being addressed by the reform. I have been a promoter of this kind of reform, even though it's all happening together at the same time with fuel subsidy removal, and therefore the hurt and the pain is almost like too much for Nigerians. But what I expect is that as long as there is sincerity of purpose and the important agencies of government like the central bank who are pushing this reform, they stay consistent. Like I said earlier, they ensure that at no time will the gap between the official and the parallel market rate, begin to swell again. If they can do their best to keep these two rates equal, then this early sign of positive outcome will be sustained, and then at that point we can begin to celebrate. So the increase in February, compared to even last year's figure that I learned was about $3.9 billion. So in 2 months or 3 months, so to speak, we have done 2.3 billion already. So if we are consistent, then we'll see this year's foreign exchange inflow more than tripling, growing much more than 300 or 400% than last year's own, which is a great thing for this economy. So there is no doubt that this reform, if followed through consistently, will improve Nigeria's, FX liquidity position, thereby reducing the pressure on the naira. So, and if we keep that going on, we find that naira will not, jump so high again towards 2,000 naira to $1. Instead, we can be at this corridor of 1,600, and maybe over time see it drop to maybe as low as 1,350. I'm estimating, if we stay consistent, because the challenge with naira is, lack of inflow of dollars. One thing again I expect the central bank to do is to also allow exporters the freedom, as it were before, to sell their money. I cannot go to the farm or to the quarry or whatever I do. I suffer to bring goods in. Out of the farm. I find a buyer in China or in America or in Britain. I find a buyer and I sell my commodity to him as an exporter, and they give me dollar or pounds. Then you force me to give it to you at a rate much lower than the parallel market rate. What does that encourage? Most exporters find a way to underreport their export or find other ways ensure that money does not come back to Nigeria. They find a way to move that money around the world, round trip it, to stay away from submitting that money to the central bank. But if you give them the freedom to sell their money in a market where the rate is, equivalent to the parallel market rate, or a market where the rates have closed up, you find that the underreporting, the hiding of that money, trying to send them away, will stop. And all the export transactions in Nigeria will fully reported, and all the dollars received will come into this country, because the people that own the dollar will get the value they believe is fair to them. It's unjust and unfair for somebody to go and suffer to produce export goods, export them, and then come back and submit the dollar, and the dollar is given to a lazy person, a corrupt person, at 800 naira to $1. He takes the sweat of the farmer at 800, and then he goes to the under market the same day and sells at 1,000 and makes 200 million naira on $1 million in a day for doing nothing. While the farmer is hurt by not being allowed to sell the dollar at 1,000. Instead, government will collect it in the what you call the INM window then at 800. So now, once the rates are closed up and held up together, what happens is that there will be an opening for more FX inflow from, hitherto closed avenues. All the international Nigerians in the diaspora will have no restraint anymore to send their money, knowing that the FX rate they get or their families get for those monies will be at a very competitive rate, a rate equal to what is obtainable in the economy. So all that will open up. Foreign direct investors will come in, even though the major issue we have with that is insecurity. Look at Nigeria today again. We're talking about 200 and something young people, students being, abducted just a few days ago. That's a major issue for foreign direct investment in this country. So if we resolve security issues and close this gap between Naira and official and unofficial rate, you find that Nigeria can only have heavy inflow of foreign investment, both portfolio investment and direct investment.
Before we go on a quick break, hasn't that already been addressed by the CBN when it gave a directive to the Bureau de Change operators upon resuming sales of forex to them, that they only permitted to sell forex at a margin not more than profit margin not more than 1%?
In today's globalized and seemingly free market, government has no reason. They have no reason to be trying to control prices. It is not done anywhere in the world. You can do a quasi-control using the money you have in your position. In fact, the quarrel with the BDC for me is very, very destructive and unnecessary. And any scheme they go into again to sell dollar to BDC at a concession rate is a crazy policy. Government should abandon all of those things. If we want to have 10,000 BDCs, we should go ahead. There's no point in removing their licenses. All this we're doing because we don't have the dollar to sell. In other countries, I travel around Africa in my training engagements. I've been in some key economies in Africa, including Kenya. Nobody struggles to curtail what the BDC people do. It's necessary. If the dollar is available in the streets, in the bank, what the bank gives you is something you get in the streets. There's no need for all of this noise. I actually foresee a situation in Nigeria where banks can sell dollar to people as they walk into the bank, quite unlike today. People have to open 100 accounts to be able to get to $2,000 for maybe travel allowance and so on. It is not necessary. When supply of USD is available in the market, whether it's a parallel market or formal market, is available on equal measure at the same rate, all of this brigandage will stop. So let central bank focus on policies that will open up, foreign exchange inflow. That's all they need. Let the BDCs breathe and forget about any policy of selling dollar to them at a concessionary rate. That is fraudulent. That is corrupt. That is a corrupt practice. You want to trim them down and then get a few of them. You say you want to give them dollar at 1,300 naira to $1. That's crime. That's criminal. Allow them exist. any number they want to be, and let them get dollar at the normal rate everybody else can get it. Then you want to put 1 naira on top and sell. Once you close the gap and hold the gap down, you don't need to do anything else about the BDCs. Is it because you will go and get our hard-earned dollar from oil export and so on, and go and sell it to somebody called BDC at a very low rate, or somebody called a big, I don't want to call some names, a government agency or whatever, give them that same dollar at low rate, when the actual rate is somewhere higher in the private market? You must breed round tripping and corruption. You can't give a rat, your fish to hold for you, and hold a cane to say, don't eat that fish. You're wasting your energy. Keep away from the rat, and everybody will rest. That's my view on this.
Let's look at some of the decisions made by the president, talking about some of the economic policies and reforms. The major out of this policy has to be the removal of fuel subsidy. I know this is overflogged, but where I'm heading is, will you say that Nigerians are enjoying the benefits of the removal of this subsidy? What do you think is playing out, and what can be done differently to let Nigeria feel the impact of the removal of this subsidy?
Yeah, the fuel subsidy removal was a necessary evil, an important surgery that needed to be done to free up government's revenue for proper expenditure on the economy. However, like I mentioned earlier, it was rather done carelessly. True, even though the government has not admitted it, but I think that statement made by our dear president on the day of inauguration was rather reckless and careless. And that's why they threw themselves into that trouble early on in the administration. The removal was, even though it had been planned earlier before he took over, but he would have given himself a month or two to put some measures in place to ensure that the announcement of the removal will not cause the kind of uprising it did cause when it was carelessly announced and now forcefully implemented through as they took over. That was a big distraction on the government. So I think it would have been done a lot better. And as they were doing it too, they were also doing the FX, reform at the same time. No proper gap to time them and manage them. That's why over the past 1 year, we have seen goods and services doubling or tripling in prices. So timing was a major issue on this policy. Otherwise, fuel subsidy removal was becoming very, very necessary for Nigeria to survive. Even though I've also commented that removing fuel subsidy without cutting down the cost of government is just making people to suffer and suffer and suffer, without government taking any adjustment on their own part. Government will always demand for Nigerians to tighten their belt in adjustment for fiscal challenges. But the same government will go around with their largesse and bogus spending on different fronts. That's the problem we have seen in our reforms. Government is not reforming to stay leaner and less costly and more efficient. Thank God that we're now moving to it, with the announcement of the intention to implement the long-standing Oronsaya report that's trying to merge or scrap or realign a number of government parastatals and agencies. It's only when that kind of fiscal adjustment is done that the benefit of fuel subsidy can be realized by Nigerians. Otherwise, it is just robbing Peter to pay Paul.
All right. Now that you've mentioned the implementation of the 2012 Oronsaya report, for which the government has set up an 11-member committee to have that happen, what are your expectations?
Well, I have some concern. When I read the members of the committee, I found that they were all career civil servants and then political appointees and so on. Of course, some statutory positions like the Attorney General of the Federation, the Secretary of the Government of Federation, and a few personal assistants here and there. making up the 10-man or 11-man committee, I felt a bit disappointed, even though it's within the rights of the president to decide who belongs to the committee or not. I'd expected that one or two members of that committee, as they were constituted in 2012, would have made this current committee, and at least one technocrat. There are, we have enough of that. I don't want to call names here. From each region of this country would have been made part of that committee, so that they will just think outside the box, not like normal government way of thinking. My fear is that that committee should not just go and bring out another white paper to be studied and dropped like they did under Buhari's government. Are we expecting implementation, or are we expecting another paper, white paper, that will now become another, issue for argument, and then we just go down the drain that way again, and nothing is done? So what I expect is that this committee should be a bit more forceful, not just to write up paper, but to begin to implement. Even though I understand that their mandate is to, look at all the legislative adjustments that need to be done, constitutional amendments, and so on, and propose them. So it may not be an immediate thing, but I don't want the process to be so long that in between we lose the drive and the zeal to implement that, that report. So I don't want us to be having second white paper, third white paper, and so on and so forth, and the whole thing ends up again in the dustbins. We need to see government pushing through policies through this committee to ensure that those institutions that are meant to be merged, the merging process starts immediately. Let the lawyers begin their fireworks and so on. Let the constitutional amendment legislators, senators and House of Rep people begin to do the work that needs to be done for those agencies that are in the Constitution, to amend them to be able to accommodate the new situation, the new mandates and so on. So I expect to see practical work being done, not another committee discussion, drinking tea, and they're writing another report again. At the end of the day, we end up with additional reports and nothing is done on ground. Like I've mentioned, we need to see the agencies that are meant to be scrapped. The ones that are meant to be merged within the next, few months. The ones that are meant to be, put under some other ministries. We see that happen, and then the manpower are properly redeployed. And like I said earlier, government can even begin to put incentive now in those agencies that are meant to be scrapped for those who want to voluntarily retire, to get away with some money, retire, and then run their own personal lives. So this time around, we expect action, not committee meeting again that will come up with another white paper report and then nothing happens.
All right. According to the speculation by some of the experts who are looking into this, there's this insinuation that this might lead to loss of jobs, especially for the heads of these agencies. Do you see this coming, and how can this be managed? Then on the other hand, the committee has been given 12 weeks to deliver this white paper. Do you think the time frame is enough to do this?
So that's my concern again about white paper, bringing up white paper upon white paper. How many white papers do we need to get this report, executed? We should be tired of white papers, because they don't give us any. We don't get anything from these papers. Let's come out with action steps. Even though I know that civil service language will always remain the same, but we expect this committee to come out with action steps. Week one, this is what we'll do, like a project management, method. What do we do in week one, week two? Beginning from when do we begin to implement this? And then for each agency, we get the consultants that will help the government pull through all these, all the new mandate adjustments. I expect that to be, practical. That's why I said this committee would not have been, made up of only government workers and career politicians. Government would have looked at a few private sector driven agencies and picked one or two, resource persons, consultants, technocrats to join this committee to get them begin to put actions behind all the white paper and so on. In terms of job loss, clearly, Nigerian government, is carrying much more, staff strength than it can manage. And like I said, the labor people will always say we don't want to lose have people lose their jobs. Way to reduce their staff strength. To slow, because that's the whole idea of this whole thing. If at the end of the day you finish it and you don't have some reduction in your salary spend, wages and expenditure and so on, then we haven't achieved much. So there must be a situation where people can be reallocated to do other things. And people can be empowered and encouraged to drop out of the boat. If a boat is sinking and you want to save the boat, you don't find a way to put people in different parts of the boat again. There are some who must have to exit. It might be painful for government more than for those who are living. Government should find a way to exit people, without much pain on the citizens. And I dwelt on that in my last interview. I've said government should find a way to incentivize people who want to resign, voluntary resignation, and then start their own thing. Train them, develop their capacity, reduce their fears by giving them some important tools and skills they need before they leave. And then, if possible, give them some extra money beyond their gratuity to enable them start their own enterprises. And in doing that, you will even not just reduce the cost of government or governance, you also improve entrepreneurship. Some of them will become exporters, some of them will become farmers, helping to solve our food crisis and so on. But the important thing is that manpower that were otherwise redundant or locked up in federal agencies are now released to become productive in the economy. So if done properly and innovatively, what would have been a disadvantage or a negative in this process can turn to positive for Nigerians. It's all about, marrying public sector thinking with private sector efficiency in the whole process. And that's why I suggest that government should look at, bringing a few, private sector energy or, interest into the committee to enable them, work more pragmatically. Thank you.
For efficiency, and as you suggested that the private sector should be brought into this committee, or at least representatives from the private sector. Let's look at one aspect that perhaps wasn't considered in the report, which is privatization of some of these agencies and parastatals. Instead of scrapping some of them, as you've agreed that there might be some level of job loss, would it be good to privatize some of this, would it be feasible rather to privatize some of these agencies rather than scrap them to make use of the redundant manpower?
Well, privatizing an agency will always be very useful if the agency's mandates or activities are privatizable. Let me use that word. What sector do they belong to? How commercial can their business become? So is it a viable business that can be given to the private sector to run? Otherwise, that would be a big issue. For example, you have an agency for handling refugees, maybe being merged with the one dealing with border issues. So you find that you can't privatize a border control agency. You can only remain a public sector agency. Maybe merge the reason are doing the same thing. Refugee management is not a private business that somebody can handle, for example. The Bureau for Public Enterprise being merged with another, those are government, natural government or civil service entities. So there's nothing private about their business that you can give it to an individual to run. Okay, agencies like, let's say, NIWA, National Inland Waterways Agency, is the kind of thing you can privatize if there's need for that. Because when they manage our waters, they can make money out of it. You can be a private enterprise making money and paying government more tax and so on. NNPC, for example, and other business-driven agencies can be privatized. But from the list of these agencies that you see that government is trying to, adjust their mandate, you find that most of them are usually public-related agencies whose businesses are not, likely to become private concerns, in my own view. Whereas Pilgrims Board and so on and so forth, these are, maybe trying to pick an agency and merge under the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and so on. These are things that government must do to run the economy. So, where there's private concerns or private interests or business that's viable, of course, privatizing them or commercializing them is always a good option. But in this case, I see a government trying to streamline government agencies, government activities under limited umbrellas instead of multiplying or duplicating their functions. That's what I see happening here.
Thank you very much for spending time with us today on Early Exchange and looking at the Oronsanye report and the committee that also has been set up by the Tinubu-led administration to implement that report. We thank you very much, Orji Chigozie Udemezue, who is Managing Consultant and CEO, Flame Academy of Consulting Limited.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me here. And I hope we meet again soon. Have a blessed day.
Early Exchange, shaping policy, advancing development.